Good evening. I would like to call to order the October 12th, 2020 meeting of the Guthrie Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Salee. Here. Smedley.
Here.
Bennett Johnson.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Schroeder.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Pearson.
Here. A quorum has been established. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let us pause for a moment of silence. Agenda item number 6, Student of the Month recognition.
Call on Blake Wimsey from Foundation Insurance to make the presentation.
Hi everybody, I'm Blake Wimsey, and this is Joaquin Ramirez. He's our October Student of the Month, and he was nominated by one of his teachers, Ms. Sharon Cochran. She couldn't be here tonight, so we've got Todd as principal, but I'd like to read to you guys what Ms. Cochran wrote for Joaquin's nomination. She writes, Joaquin Ramirez is the epitome of a responsible student, and his team of teachers at the junior high agreed that he deserves to be recognized as the GPS September 2020 Student of the Month. Please know that Joaquin has more positive character traits, including being polite, attentive, and respectful young man. For this nomination, however, I will focus on his character trait of being responsible. Joaquin shows up to class on time and completely prepared for learning. He is attentive to lessons, follows directions, and stays on task whenever completing an assignment. He has faithfully worn his face mask in my class since we began the school year, which I believe is honoring his parents' wishes. Joaquin is the last student to leave third-hour reading class each day because he takes some time to pack up his backpack, placing his learning materials in the correct folder and his earbuds in the right spot. Joaquin is a quiet young man, and I believe he is a perfect example of saying actions speak louder than words. His responsible actions speak loudly for his apparent desire to learn and to honor his parents' wishes. Okay, so Joaquin, on behalf of Foundation Insurance, we have a $65 gift card for State Youth Place, and you've got them right now.
Congratulations, Joaquin. Number 7, the Employee of the Month recognition.
Mr. Ogle.
I have
have to admit, I did not catch that on the board report. We are now doing those at the sites, but our Employee of the Month certified was Kaylee Welch. She was nominated by Joe Avey, and she is a teacher out at Charter Oak. And our support employee was Melissa White. She was nominated by Danny Watson, and she is a para at Central.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations to our Employees of the Month. Agenda item number 8, comments to the board by citizens registered to be.
We have none.
Okay, comments to the board by board members. Dr. Simpson, Superintendent's report.
Thank you. Fall break is this Thursday and Friday, and so make sure that families are prepared for that. The Edmond Board of Realtors donated some school supplies that they received during a recent school supply drive. We accepted those items and are in the process of boxing them up and distributing age-appropriate items to each school. Boxes of food items were also donated, and those have been sent to the food pantry at the high school. Softball completed their season by taking the host Lawton Eisenhower to the if necessary game of the regional tournament. Congratulations to our ladies there. We lost 2 football games due to COVID quarantines, and I'll talk a little bit more about the big picture of that in a moment in my report. We're working to make up the Piedmont game. Our football team got back in action this last Saturday with a 38-21 victory at Woodward. Our record is currently 4-0, and we play this Thursday at home against Guyman, COVID permitting. The FFA Pork Chop Dinner is this Friday at the fairgrounds, and there will be COVID protocols in place to allow for social distancing and a safe environment. The next item, board members, you have at your seat 2 charts. One of them is one that will look very familiar. You've seen it, and it is through. Says through October 12th, but those numbers are actually through the 10th of October. That's what's been reported today. You can see a large uptick in cases in Logan County, followed by a downtick that we hope that trend continues. One of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight is where we are with COVID. We are one of the few metro school districts that has been open continuously from the start of school. And we pulled numbers as of today to statistically show you what we have dealt with. In positive COVID cases, and you have those by building, 23 total positive student cases in Guthrie Public Schools since school started. We have had 21 of those students have recovered, and 2 are still out awaiting their full 10 days past symptoms. Staff members, we've had 5 positive cases, and you can see those by building, and all 5 have now recovered. What you see also is the highest number is at the high school. That stands to reason. We have the largest enrollment and also the most mobility with students. I think Mr. LeGrand has done a tremendous job, along with Mr. Bramwell, of moving students through their building, creating a safe environment to reduce spread. Here's where being open the way that we are has become a challenge, but not one that we want to throw up our hands and say we can't do it. It's with quarantines. We've had 196 students complete quarantine, 129 of those at the high school. Part of that is simply because they are around each other, there's more contact, and there's more mobility. We have 69 currently in quarantine. And these are all quarantines that are school-related exposures, as you can see on that chart. We've had 13 staff that have had to quarantine. And we have 2 staff that have completed quarantine. We have 2 staff that are currently in quarantine. A quarantine will require 14 days removal from the environment and 14 days removal from the school. And so then you go to exposures, and we looked at this, exposures outside of school. And you can see that the number of students and staff, we have staff that have completed quarantines 5. We have 4 that are currently in quarantine for exposures outside of school. Exposures outside of school with students that have completed at 36, and we have 52 currently in quarantine that are exposures outside of school. Those numbers are not included in the school-related, too, so very careful there to... So total of quarantine students up to this point is 353, either with an exposure inside school or outside of school, and 24 staff. So you can see what 23 student and 5 staff member COVID cases have led to a very large number of quarantines. I've said from the start, and I maintain this, you know, we're flying by the seat of our pants like everyone else is. And what I have determined, and this is something that has gone out in emails to staff members, is that I don't believe student infection will close us. I believe quarantine numbers of staff will close us. We are desperately short on substitute teachers, and so if anyone is watching at home that is bored and wants to be a substitute teacher, Mr. Ogle will gladly take your call. We need more substitute teachers so that we can continue the in-person instruction that has set us apart from many of the metro districts. There's a lot of information on here, but one thing that I will say that I would completely applaud is the efforts of our school nurse, April Devereaux. She has worked tirelessly through weekends and taking calls, making calls, because the health department is, quite frankly, overwhelmed. And she is working very hard to provide communication with parents who many times are very concerned about the situation and need someone to talk to. So there's a lot there. Bottom line to it is we are having school. Our kids are learning. It's not perfect, and it's not going to be perfect, but I'm very proud of the work that our staff's done. That's my report.
Next item is the consent agenda. Are there any items to be pulled? If not, a motion is in order.
Madam President, I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion has been made by Smedley and seconded by Flagg to approve the consent agenda. Roll call, please.
Salee. Smedley.
Yes.
Bennett Johnson.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Schroeder.
Yes.
Flagg.
Yes.
Pearson.
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. Business agenda, item A, discussion and possible action regarding the 2020-2021 school budget.
Ms. Chappell?
Good evening. To the board members, Dr. Simpson, and you that are present, this is your 2021 operating budget presentation. And I will try to operate this PowerPoint that is behind me as you listen. You have received a copy of the PowerPoint in front of you, so if you can, just follow along with me. I will go page by page. So we will start with page 2, which is our budget overview. Our operating budget structure, for those who may not be aware, is that our estimate of needs is provided to us annually from Putnam and Company, which is our our auditors, And then, once they provide those numbers to us, it is approved by our Excise Board of Logan County. And so we have several funding sources that I will go over in detail later, but we are funded by state aid from the Department of Education. We have our local resources, which is our Avalor Tax. We have federal sources, and then we have our county sources, which is our mortgage taxes and our county for meal. And when we talk about our funding purposes and limitations, just want to bring to your attention that most people think that the district operates primarily with one fund, which is our general fund, because it is our largest fund. However, just to bring to your attention, we are functioning with 8 funds at one time. We do have our general fund, we have our building fund, child nutrition, we have a sinking fund, insurance, bond, and we also have gifts and endowments along with the activity fund. What's important to note about these funds, and especially the general fund, is that normally the state has a limitation of 14% carryover that you can have in your general fund, but that has been waived for this year with the circumstances of the state. And so, more importantly, at any one time, we must only have 3 months worth of revenue in our funds legally. And so we just want to keep track of that and know that when you're asking the question, why do we have $3 million on hand in our balance fund? Why aren't we spending that money on our staff or our students? We actually are. That is really just a month and a half of revenues on hand for our district, as we operated at a minimum of $1.9 million per month. Our analysis for our fund balance carryover, just want to make mention that this year in FY 19-20, we ended our fiscal year just a little short of our revenues that we projected, at least by $284,000. And the reason why we were short on our collections is gross production tax was down 23%. It trended that way for the entire year. And then at the end of the year, we made efforts as a district to make our child nutrition department whole, as we all know that they lost revenues with the closure of schools midstream in March. So with that, we did end our fund balance carryover for FY 19-20 at 11%. Our board policy is normally 12%, but that was a pre-authorized percentage of 11%. We were authorized by the board last year to end with that amount if we were able to get to that, due to a frozen step that we gave to our teachers in that fiscal year. And then for our revenue projections, I'll talk about those going forward, but just know that we are projecting revenues very conservatively this year. So if you turn to page 3, we'll talk about our estimate of needs that we have been provided by Putnam and Company. So if you are looking at the first column, which is our current year, or you're looking at your PowerPoint, you see that in our general fund, our carryover is $3,023,000, and then they are estimating that our miscellaneous revenue for the year collections will be $18.5 million. And if you're wondering, how do they get that number? That number is provided to them from our staff. We get our allocations from the state in July, and we know approximately how much we will receive in federal aid or different federal aid or state aid funding for the year. So we give them all of those notifications that we have received, and they calculate that figure there. The Avalor Tax Estimate, $5.5 million. That is a 90% calculation that the auditors predict each year. Now, how do they get that 5.5? Someone asked me that question. How do they know that that's close or in the range? Well, our net assessed evaluation property assessment, our net assessed property for the year was $170 million. And so we all know that the general fund has a meal of 35.84. So for you mathematicians, if you take our net assessed evaluation of 170 million and round that out to 5 decimals times the 0.03584, then you will see that the required tax collection for the year is 6.1 million. And so then the auditors are estimating that we will receive 90% of that. And so that's how they get 5.5 on this form. And so if you're looking at general fund, they have estimated our need to be 27.1 million versus 26.9 million last year. In our building fund, the same principle applies. We have a carryover of $478,000 from FY 19-20, and their Avalor Tax Estimate is $793,000. If you're going to do the math on that, the mills is 5.12 for the building fund, and you just take that same calculation against the 170 million for our net assessed valuation, property valuation. Child Nutrition Fund, they are estimating that we will need $1.367 million to operate for this fiscal year, which is a difference of $103,000 less than last year. And then our school age fund, that remains the same at $75,619. And then we have our sinking fund millage levy. And so, again, someone has asked me that same question. Well, how do they get 16.58? It all centers around our net assessed property assessment. So if you take that same $170,411,000 and you divide that by the required tax that the county has said that we need for those collections, which is $2.8 million. So you divide your $2.8 million by your $170 million, and then you will get 16.58. And so that is the difference that we need to make up in millage in order to receive those tax collections. We're on page 4 now. We're talking about our revenue sources that I mentioned just a moment ago. And so just to recap FY 2019-20, 63%, as you see in blue, is our revenue source, which is our state sources. And that comprises of our gross production tax, motor vehicle, school land, state aid, textbooks, driver's ed, and ACE. If you're looking at the 4% for county sources, that makes up our percentage of revenue for the year. That is our mortgage tax or county for meal. 8% is for federal sources, and that's all of our title money. And this year going forward, which I'll discuss, will be included our CARES Act funds as well. And then finally, our local sources, 25% is made up basically from our ad valorem tax collections. You turn the page to page 5, budget guidelines and details on the general fund. So as I mentioned, as of June 30th, 2020, our fund balance held an 11% approved balance at $3,023,000, and this was a decrease of $284,000, which I just mentioned on the first page of the estimate of needs. The initial state aid revenue for 2020 that we received is $313,000 more than was actually collected in 2018-2019. And so that is holding steady at this time. The state right now is doing very well because with the delay in income taxes in July, that has brought in additional revenue for the state, and so they're able to have that excess revenue so that the school districts were not cut in their funding in the current year. So midterm allocations in December, that is the question of the hour. And where do we go from here? So we know where we stand as of today. We know that we will have a reduction in our revenue in December midterm, and this is largely due because our ad valorem or net assessed evaluation property did increase for the year. You'll see in our next slide, we did increase by $10 million. So whenever we have more revenue locally, we lose money at the state level to offset that balance. So just from that alone, we know that we will have our chargeables in December that will decrease our state aid. Now with that, the growing concern that you hear out in the news is concerning virtual schools all over, not just EPIC, but any virtual school at all. So in considering that, we took a conservative approach for this budget. Now, we had maybe 3 options that we could have taken as far as how do we want to calculate where our weighted ADM will be or what the factors will be from the state. The good news for us is that even though we lost students this school year, it does not affect us this year. We are on our highest weighted ADM of the last 2 years, which is 5,289.13. And so what does that mean for us? Even when we get to next year in 22, we will still be on our highest weighted ADM, even though our student count numbers are lower this year. You get to take the highest of the previous 2 years. So what affects our budget is the factors from the state. Right now, the current factor is $3,467 per student. And so with this reduction, or with the increase of students attending virtual school as opposed to brick and mortar, we know that some of that revenue is going to be allocated to the virtual schools. We just do not know how much. And so with that, you have to estimate. So if EPIC is saying that they have increased 61,000 students, you say to yourself, well, do you believe it or not? Are you going to gamble or not? And so what we did is we believe them until they're proven otherwise. And so we would like to take the most conservative approach as possible. And so with that, we're estimating that the dollar factor per student will decrease by $67. Now, we have heard other institutions that represent school districts say that they think it will be half of that. And it may be, but our decision as a district is to go with the maximum, just in case it is correct. And so we're estimating that that factor will be $3,400 per student. So as you're listening now into the education arena of what's going on with factors, that's what you want to listen for. What is that number? Right now it's 3,467.17. You want to know how far down does that number go after the factors come out in December. So our increased net assessed valuation of property in FY21, as I mentioned, did result in an additional 6.47% growth. So that's total dollars of $170 million for 11. So approximately $10 million of growth, which is good for the district. So if you would, please turn to your next page, which is page 6. This is just a general fund carryover analysis for the last 7 years. We like to shift that over each year and include the most current year. So as you see, and we discussed this last year, we did have a dip in FY 16 and 17, and we all know that that was due to a reduction of staff at that time. And so we have bounced back in FY 18 and 19. And again, we are still steady and strong. We know that that dip for FY 20 was calculated and methodical, so we're right on target as far as trying to keep our fund balance carryover stable. If you turn to the next page, page 7, we do address our net assessed valuation analysis. And just so that you see the numbers, or you see the graph over the last 5 years, that the county is continuing to grow. And so right now, our FY21 net assessed valuation is $170,411,000. Again, an increase of 6.47%, and that does affect not only our ad valorem collections, but also our bonding capacity. Let's turn to page 8. And this is where we'll go a little in depth on the general fund revenue analysis and how we're projecting our fund balance carryover for next year. So as you see in the first section, that is total local sources that we just discussed, which makes up 25% of our operating revenues. And so we are estimating that we will receive our normal percentage of collections of ad valorem. Although the auditor estimates 90%, we know that the district normally does collect more than that, in a range of 95 to 96 every year, and we have for many years. And so we have continued with our calculations for that at $5.8 million for ad valorem tax on the very first line. But for that entire section, we had an actual collection of 5.9 in FY 1920, and so we are projecting $6.2 million for FY 2021. We have our next section, which is immediate sources. Again, our county formula and our mortgage tax. We have decreased our projected forecast for that item, as you see, for that revenue. As you see, our actual collections were $1,055,000 last year, and we've just decreased that just by hair to $1 million for the year. The concern is in the state sources section. The state itself is trending with most districts. They have informed us to center your budget around a loss of 4 to 6%. And so we have incorporated that into our projections. And so that entire state sources, most of those line items have been decreased by 6%. Gross production tax, as you see, $595,000 is our estimate, and the other major item on that line will be our foundations and salary incentive, or which is our state aid that is affected by the factor. We are projecting $9.3 million for that line item. And so state collections for the year on page 9, we are projecting $14.5 million. Federal sources. There is a jump there if you're looking at the FY 19 and 20 actual column, $2,074,000, and then you see that we are projecting $2,854,000. And if you're thinking, wow, that's a whole lot of money, well, it is. And the reason being is that we are receiving our CARES Act funds, as we've been notified, that are reimbursable. It will be reimbursable as we accrue our expenses. And so we have been allotted $782,106, which is line 2. It's listed as CARES Act funds. And so those will offset some of our expenditures that we normally have for the year. And so we're going to allocate some of those to our salaries and insurance and other items that will decrease some of our discretionary costs that we incur each year. We do have fixed costs versus discretionary, which we will see on the next page, and so that will offset those expenses and even any losses that we may incur during the midterm allocation. So at the bottom of that page, our fund balance projection for FY 2021 will be $3.3 million. If you will turn with me to page 10. This is just an outline of our revenue sources that we have spoken about. As you can see, we've been very consistent over the last 3 years with our county sources, federal sources, local sources, and I just want to bring to your attention that dip there in the state sources in blue for FY 2021 is simply due to what I just informed you of a decrease of 6% across the board on state sources. Page 11. This is our general fund fixed and discretionary costs, and we started bringing this report to the board several years ago just so that everyone can have a direct picture of where the expenses are for the district. And so as you see on that first line, that the majority of our expenses are classified under salary and benefits. We have an average range anywhere from 86 to 88% on salaries. And then you can go down the form and see the next classifications of professional and technical services at $160,000, our utilities, our insurance, and lease agreements and what have you. And so the CARES Act funds that we will be using to offset some of our expenditures have already been outlined in this report. As you see, for example, on insurance, we are normally at $324,000, and so for FY21, there is a projected cost of $104,000. We have already excluded our credit, if you will, that we will receive from the CARES Act. And so what's important about this report is at the bottom of the report, it shows in the far right column that our 2021 percentage of costs will be 4.96. As I mentioned, the district normally only has 6% of discretionary income, and so we spent that last year, as you see, at 5.55, and this year that amount has decreased down to 4.96 to offset the funding from CARES Act. And with that, our overall projected expenses for FY 2021 will be $24,548,695, which is a decrease from last year. Turn to page 12. This is our operating budget by function, which we are required by law to present to the board. And if you're looking in the first column, which is the general fund, you will see that instruction is $14.2 million, which is the majority of our expenditure classification for the year, which again is basically payroll. Each of these functions listed on this form, all the way down to 2,700, are basically our payroll broken up into those functions as the employees are classified by functions. And so we have, again, our total expenditures projected of $24,548,695. In our building fund, we are projecting $800,000. We know that $50,000 of that has already taken place for our lease expenditure. In our child nutrition fund, we are estimating $1.352 million. In the sinking fund, which is what we are required to capture for the year, is $3.3 million. And we have already encumbered those funds for repayment. And then in our gifts and endowment funds, which we receive for donations or scholarships, we are estimating $17,000 in expenditures for the year. And then we have on hand our insurance and casualty fund of $30,000 for incidentals in case something does happen, and we do have deductibles or expenses there. And then our bond fund, we are estimating that our expenditures for the year will be $1.39 million. On page 13, this is just a breakdown for you of our general expenditures by function, what we just spoke of again. And so it's another pictorial graph. As you see, instruction is 58%. And our second highest is school administration expenditures, followed by maintenance. And so those are in order. You can see those percentages. The general fund expenditure analysis on page 14. This is a 7-year analysis just to show you that the expenditures have increased over the years. But again, we've discussed why they have due to payroll or salary increases that were given mandated by the state in FY19. And then we did do an additional step in FY20, although those are not the only expenditures, but those are some of the reasons why those expenditures did increase. And then we'll move over to the building fund, just briefly. We all know that the building fund is an expense fund for repairs throughout the district, very basic. And these funds are derived from our 5 mills that we just talked about that is levied and then used along with the prior year carry forward. In FY 2021, the carry forward for the building fund was $478,158, which is a decrease of approximately $262,039. And we all know that that is simply just due to our acquisition of land of $265,000. Otherwise, they would have been right in range, around $748,000, which is their average. And so we are definitely on track to rebuild the building fund. We have some strategies in place to recoup some of our expenses for our PPE through FEMA that will help offset the building fund expenditures. And just real quick on their building fund carryover analysis, as I mentioned, you see that they would normally be in the 700,000 range, and so we just have that dip in FY20 that we are definitely going to strive very hard to get that figure back up where it needs to be. And so with that, that concludes my presentation of your 2021 operating budget. Are there any questions?
Ms. Chappell, I have a question. On the page 3, on your estimated needs on the general ledger fund.
Yes.
On the total budget, the $27,172,000 figure.
Yes.
How does that play a part whenever you flip over to page 9 and you have total balance and collections at $27,900,000? $27,900,000.
That difference is because, again, the auditors on page 3 are estimating all of our revenues only at 90%. And on page 9, the district, we are calculating everything at 95 to 96% that we will receive our revenues in. So every year that we will show more than on page 3.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chapel.
A couple of things that I might mention here that are good things for our district. We are continuing to see a trend of growth in local revenue that protects the district from state budget shortfalls mid-year that we have experienced in the past. So that trend is a positive. And then Michelle touched on it, but I'd call your attention to, on the building fund, this is on page 16, if you'll turn there with me. You guys know I'm an old history teacher and I love to look at things historically. Okay, little pop quiz here. Why did it drop so much in FY15? Yeah. We bought Charter Oak property. And so very similar trend with the purchase of the 38 acres and building it back. When Michelle and I sat down, and Mr. Ogle was a part of those discussions about the where we were going to place the budget, there is the world abounds with uncertainty, the state abounds with uncertainty, and education funding abounds with even more uncertainty right now. And so that's why we chose the most conservative approach. There are things going on today and tomorrow even with some virtual charter items which could greatly affect this bottom line of state aid, and so I think the most conservative approach is the most prudent at this point, and I applaud Michelle and her work here to put this together.
I'm going to ask one quick question.
Sure.
The state projects 4 to 6% decrease in funding. Is that coming from the state Board of Equalization or the State Department of Education?
That is coming from the State Board of Education, because they're predicting already that growth reduction tax will remain to continue trending down at 22%, as well as other collections in the
And Chris, some of that, I believe, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of that is also the growth in virtual charters across the board, which raises that. And while we're still on our high 3, they've grown exponentially, and so that will take from some of those factors in order to prepare for it.
A motion would be in order on business agenda item number A.
Madam President, I make a motion that we approve the budget for 2020 and 2021's school budget, and I'd like to thank Michelle and Dr. Simpson and everyone else involved, because I know it was a very trying task to try to figure this all out.
Was that Travis?
Yes.
Motion's been made by Davis and seconded by Travis to approve the 2020-2021 school budget. Is there discussion? Roll call.
Salee?
Yes.
Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. B, recommendation, consideration, and action to approve the transcription of math and science credit options taught at Meridian Technology Center.
This is an annual item that we bring to the board for their ratification so that some of our students, they can take classes that will count toward their core curriculum at Meridian, and it gives us the ability to transcript it, and it's required that we have annual authorization by the board. If there's any questions, Mr. Ogle will be glad to answer them. Recommend approval.
Madam President, I make a motion to approve the transcription of math and science credit options taught at Meridian Technology Center.
Second.
Motion's been made by Schroeder and seconded by Smedley to approve business item agenda number 11B. Is there discussion? Roll call.
Salee? Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. C, recommendation, consideration, and action upon revision of the COVID-19 protocol updates for 2020-2021.
Page 103 through 116, we made a change on September 25th as we were reviewing the protocols and also having discussions about the belief that it was inevitable that we would have a mask mandate based on our protocols. We had followed the recommendation of the State Department of Ed when these were originally written of having in elementary schools having the pre-K through third grade be where they have flexibility to remove the mask within the classroom and keep it in the common areas. And as we looked at the lay of our schools and how we're configured with pre-K through fourth, we didn't want to create a situation where we had one set of rules for part of the kids in the building and another set of rules for another part of the building. And so that's why we extended that to the 4th grade. And that is the only change that we made on the 25th. And as you know, we have been mask mandated. We've completed 2 weeks, and today we started our 11th day of instruction with mandatory masks inside our buildings.
A motion would be in order.
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
I talked about something before the meeting. I certainly support amending this to extend to the 4th grade. I'd like to make a motion or see a motion made to line out at the teacher's discretion, as Dr. Simpson stated. We're doing this so there's consistency in the rules, but I think the way we have it currently, there's a full spectrum of implementation of the mask. And so we do have a different set of rules from classroom to classroom. Some teachers, they require a mask, others do not. So I would like to make a motion that we approve this policy with the amendment that we remove at the teacher's discretion. That still leaves it to the determination of the district level administrator to determine what those attenuating circumstances may be. But I think this would give more consistency in the policy and its application within the building itself. That'd be page 104.
Page 104, right after where it's got the red line of 4th grade, strike at the teacher's discretion, and it would be based on determination of the district level administration.
I think that would still give our district administrators and principals some discretion there. But Dr. Simpson said, and the reason we changed this to go to the 4th grade so we don't have a different set of rules. I think the same can be said for the classroom application of the policy itself. We're not saying there's not a consistency there.
So you're striking at the teacher's discretion?
Yes. That would be my motion.
No, he can amend that, and he can make that a part of the motion to approve that with this.
So do we have a second to the original motion with the amendment?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Oh, before we do, I would ask that I get a little bit of time to implement through Ad Council tomorrow morning, because we'll have to have a discussion with the principals about that. But
Is this something we need to set aside then?
no, I don't think so. I don't think it's necessary to set it aside as long as I can have a little bit of time.
It hadn't gone into effect till he meets with the admin committee.
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
Can I hear who did the second?
Jennifer
Thank you.
Bennett Johnson.
Roll call, please.
Salee?
Yes.
Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. Recommendation, consideration, and action to a new district policy C7A, emergency preparedness and management.
We brought this for a first reading last month and wanted to go ahead and get this approved. It's a recommendation from our legal counsel to address many of the issues that, some of which are addressed in different parts of our policies, but this spells out a lot clearer some of the actions that we take in the current times that we have, but also in the event of dangerous weather, dangerous events in school, such as violence and things like that.
Madam President, I move that we approve District Policy C7A, Emergency Preparedness and Management Act.
Second.
Who seconded? I'm sorry.
I did.
Okay. Motion's been made by Flagg and seconded by Smedley to approve D. Is there discussion? Roll call, please.
Salee?
Yes.
Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Schroeder, Clay,
Yes.
Pearson.
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. E, recommendation, consideration, and action upon choosing the ACT as the district's high school academic assessment for 2020-2021 school year.
This is a new requirement from the State Department of Education that we create a committee that examines what tests that we take as a district, and we can demonstrate that we have taken input from our community. Mr. Ogle has reviewed this information and formed the committee. And Doug, if you want to say a few words about what you've done with the committee and where we are with this.
So when we ended the EOIs at the high school, the state adopted a new test for the high school students, and at that time it was the ACT. And so just recently, the state has changed the state testing of that for juniors to the SAT. As a district, you can opt out of the SAT if you do certain things. The first thing was to have a committee with teachers, counselors, parents, business people, and an administrator. And so I held that. It was unanimous with that committee that the ACT was what was best for our students. And the next thing that we had to do was we had to give every junior parent a chance to voice their concerns, that the committee chose the ACT instead of SAT. And so we had a survey that we put out. Dee helped me, and we sent out to every junior parent and student. The student had a chance to, and out of 70 responses, we only had one that came back. They agree with the ACT, but they would also like to have the chance to take the SAT. Of course, the state only will pay for one. And so the last portion of that is we have to have it board approved that there was a committee, that the survey did go out, and then I show the minutes that the board accepted the recommendation for the ACT.
Doug, on the ACT acceptance, I know that's in Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. Is that correct? And all the other states require SAT?
Well, I think it's depending on what college you're going to go to. Most of our students, and Mr. LeGrand can probably answer this better, is most of our students that stay local, it's the ACT, and that's why the majority of our students would prefer to take the ACT. We already take that as an 8th grader as an Explorer test, and we take the pre-ACT as a sophomore, and so they're used to taking that test. And so if you're going to the Ivy League or going to some of the coast, the SAT is probably, the option to go, but they can still take that. They just have to pay for it. The state will only pay for one test. But Mr. LeGrand may answer your question probably a little bit better than me.
That's true. The majority of our students that leave Guthrie High School go to college or university in and around the state or surrounding states. And the ones that do, which are maybe 2 or 3 outside Oklahoma a year, and a smaller percentage will actually go to the east or west coast for college, and those students are going to take the SAT anyway. So for the clientele of our students and the majority of our students, I think it benefits us to take the ACT because that's the test that the majority of the colleges and universities for our students can say.
But our Oklahoma schools also accept SAT scores also, correct?
Sure. But the majority of them just recently have gone to the SAT, but in the past it's primarily been the ACT.
It sounds like in the future we may need to switch to the SAT if everybody's switching, because I know there was very limited states that accepted ACT when my kids were looking at schools, and if the Oklahoma schools are switching to accepting the SAT scores, I mean, that's something that we probably need to look at in the future.
Well, they'll take both. It's just a preference of which test that our district and our parents and the board will approve that they take. And so it's a local decision of which one that we would prefer the students to take that we pay for, that the state will pay for.
I assume will this be something we look at every year?
Yes, it has to be approved every year.
Okay, because we may see a trend towards the SAT.
Yeah.
We may want to change.
Yes, that's...
But the SAT, I mean, how many part numbers is the SAT?
4. I think it's 4.
So is it still correct that you can take just parts of that?
They just changed it on the ACT. I'm not sure on the SAT.
SAT, you can take just certain parts.
Yes, I mean, so we can look at this every year, but it seems like student scored exceptionally well in one subject matter area, then they would only have to retake a portion of the SAT for the entire test.
Yeah, ACT just changed that. Used to you have to take the whole ACT, now you can just take a portion of that.
I think the reading or the writing may be more pieces separate. I don't know. I'm okay accepting the ACT, but I like to consider that from year to year based on trends.
I think it's also important to remember that the overwhelming opinion of the input that we received was for the ACT. And so we probably need to, as we examine this going forward, be able to provide some education about the SAT to that committee, maybe more so than was done this year. But I think also we want to be mindful of when we put that committee together, of the parents that and be mindful of their input as well.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Ogle. A motion would be in order.
Madam President, I make a motion that we approve the choosing of the ACT as the district high school's academic assessment for 2020-2021 school year.
Motion's made by Smedley and seconded by Schroeder to approve 11E. Is there discussion? Roll call, please.
Salee. Smedley.
Yes.
Bennett Johnson.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Schroeder. Clegg.
Yes.
Pearson.
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. 12, proposed executive session for the purpose of discussing employment of personnel, FMLA request, resignation, separation from employment, and transfer of position request, all as set out on the personnel reports, discussion of the terms of employment of Dr. Michael Simpson, disclosure of which information would violate the confidentiality requirements of state and/or federal law, all pursuant to 25 Oklahoma Statute Section 307B1 and 7. Vote to go into executive session.
Second.
Motion was made by Salee and seconded by Davis to go into executive session. Roll call, please.
Salee. Smedley.
Yes.
Bennett Johnson.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Schroeder. Clegg.
Yes.
Pearson.
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries.
We're going to the little theater. Just right through there. Would you give this to Chris?
reconvening from executive session. Only the items listed in agenda item number 12 were discussed in executive session, and no votes were taken. This will constitute the minutes of the executive session. Agenda item 13, vote on action set out on the personnel reports.
Madam President, I make a motion that we approve the personnel reports.
Motion is made by Smedley and seconded by Salee to approve the action on the personnel reports. Roll call, please.
Salee? Yes. Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. 14, recommendation, consideration, and action to accept any resignations offered since the posting of the agenda.
Madam President, we have one resignation to consider. You have in front of you resignation from Sean Burgess from Charter Oak. Recommend approval.
Madam President, I accept the resignation from Sean Burris.
Second.
Motion was made by Davis and seconded by Clegg to accept the resignation of Sean Burris. Roll call, please.
Salee? Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Motion carries. 15, discussion and possible action on new business not known or could not have been reasonably foreseen at the time of the agenda posting.
We have none.
Madam President, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion's made by Smedley and seconded by Schroeder to adjourn. Roll call, please.
Salee?
Yes.
Smedley?
Yes.
Bennett Johnson?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Schroeder?
Yes.
Clegg?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.